Imagine opening a heavy steel vault, right? And you're expecting to find the foundational blueprint of the cosmos inside.
Like the ultimate rule book.
Exactly, the rule book. But when you pull the door open, there is absolutely nothing inside. And I don't mean a vacuum waiting to be filled with, like, air or particles.
Right, because a vacuum is still something.
Yeah, a vacuum still has geometry. I mean, the sheer absence of space, the absence of time, geometry, mathematical laws, just absolute zero. Now imagine staring into that void and watching that nothingness divide itself so relentlessly and so infinitely fast that it accidentally builds the entire universe.
Which just sounds completely absurd when you first hear it.
It really does. But from that, you get gravity, quasars, and eventually the very brain you are using to think about it. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tearing down the standard model of physics to look at what might actually lie beneath it.
And doing that requires, well, a total abandonment of our usual macroscopic intuition. I mean, if you ask standard physics what the universe is made of, it hands you a catalog of parts, you know? Like looking at a car engine.
Right, exactly. Quarks, leptons, bosons. But if you ask a radical ontological framework what the universe is made of, the answer might literally be a rapidly vibrating void.
And that is the exact premise of the massive stack of sources sitting in front of us today. We're unpacking a highly ambitious 2026 framework called the NKE theory.
NKE, yeah.
Which stands for Nix Crusta Etwas. So in English, that translates to Nothing Crust Something. It is the life's work of researcher Arndt Michael Meyer.
But, you know, a theory proposing to build reality from absolute zero, it really can't just be viewed in isolation.
No, definitely not. To really understand the audacity of NKE, we are putting it head-to-head with two of the most infamous and heavily debated alternative frameworks in theoretical physics and metaphysics.
Right, the big ones.
First up is Thomas Campbell's My Big Toey, his theory of everything, which posits that consciousness is essentially the fundamental computer rendering reality.
It's a fascinating model. It is. And second, we have Chris Langan's CTMU, the cognitive theoretic model of the universe, which argues that reality is a self-generating logical language.
The contrast between these three is really what makes this analysis so rich, because they're all attempting to solve the ultimate puzzle, right? How do you get a physical universe from a non-physical origin?
How do you get something from nothing, basically?
Exactly. But they start from wildly different conceptual corners. I mean, Meyer uses cold mechanics, Campbell uses teleological consciousness, and Langan uses self-referential logic.
So, for anyone listening who loves the bleeding edge of theoretical physics, or simply wonders how existence, bootstraps itself into being without resorting to magic, this is for you.
It's going to be a heavy one.
Oh, yeah. We've got Arndt Michael Meyer's comprehensive 97-page thesis outlining NKE. We have transcripts of AI-assisted philosophical stress tests where the theories actively probe for logical fallacies.
Those were brutal to read, honestly.
Very intense. And we have massive comparative data sets mapping how these different theories attempt to redefine matter, gravity, and the nuclear forces without relying on invisible fields.
Which is huge. And the motivation behind all of this material traces back to a deceptively simple observation about standard physics.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, the standard model is incredibly effective at predicting outcomes, right? It gives us the mathematics, the equations, the statistical probabilities. It is essentially the roadmap of reality.
Okay.
But a roadmap only gives you the signs and the intersections. It tells you that if you drive at a certain speed, you will arrive at a certain destination.
But it doesn't tell you what the road is made of.
Exactly. It does not explain what the asphalt actually is. And the origin story of NKE begins with Arndt Michael Meyer spending 47 years obsessing over a single question that highlights that missing asphalt.
47 years is a long time for one question. What was it?
The question was simply, how does an electron know how to move?
Okay, wait. How does it know how to move? Standard physics would say it moves because of forces.
Right. Right. Think about the mechanics of a simple magnetic field. Standard physics provides a gorgeous, elegant mathematical equation to describe the path an electron will take when it encounters that field.
Sure.
But the electron itself possesses no computational capacity. It isn't like solving a differential equation in real time to determine its trajectory.
Oh, I see what you mean. It doesn't have a tiny brain.
Exactly. It doesn't know what a magnetic field is.
Let's push on that for a second. An electron is entirely blind. It has no internal mechanism to, read the laws of physics.
None at all.
So when standard physics says the electromagnetic field exerts a force on the particle, That is really just a descriptive statement. It's not mechanistic.
Yes, we are describing the what, but completely ignoring the how.
Right. How does the void of space actually transmit a physical instruction to a blind point of mass?
That gap in causality is what drove Meyer to seek an absolute fundamental ontological simplification. Because the problem was starting your physical model with an electron, or a quantum string, or an 11-dimensional membrane.
You inherently bake in an infinite regret.
Exactly. You always have to ask, well, what is the string made of? Who tuned the membrane?
It's the whole turtles all the way down problem.
Right. To escape the infinite regress of who created the creator, Meyer concluded that a true theory of everything must start with zero assumptions. It must start with absolute nothing.
Okay, I have a major problem with that claim. And I know the AI stress tests and the sources did too.
They definitely did.
Claiming a theory has zero preconditions feels like a total logical paradox.
Mm.
Even if you strip away matter, space, and time, you are still assuming that the concept of logic exists.
You are assuming cause and effect.
Yeah. You cannot build a house if you don't even assume the concept of a dimension to build a house inside of.
The source material actually validates your pushback entirely. The AI stress tests relentlessly attack this myth of zero preconditions.
I mean, how could they not?
Right. Epistemologically, a system without any preconditions simply cannot exist. If you start with a true absolute zero, no logic, no process, no potential, you remain at zero forever.
The system would just be completely empty.
Yes. Every framework, no matter how radical, must smuggle in at least one starting block. The fascinating part is examining what each of our three theories chooses as its unavoidable starting block.
Okay, so let's break down those starting blocks, the foundational axioms, starting with Thomas Campbell's My Big TOE.
Well, Campbell doesn't pretend to start from nothing. He explicitly states his preconditions.
He's pretty upfront about it.
Very. He requires two fundamental assumptions. First, consciousness exists as a primordial, undifferentiated state.
Right.
And second, evolution exists specifically, a fundamental drive to lower entropy, to create order out of chaos within that consciousness system.
I mean, those are massive assumptions. You have to accept a sentient, evolving cosmic foundation before you even attempt to calculate the orbit of an electron.
It is a top-down approach. Now, contrast that with Chris Langen's approach in the CTMU. Langen's stated goal is to achieve a theory with zero arbitrary assumptions.
Which we just said is impossible.
Right. But he attempts it by creating what he calls a super tautology.
A super tautology. Okay, meaning a statement that is true by its own logical necessity, like saying A equals A.
Exactly.
But how do you get a whole universe out of A equals A?
Langen argues that reality is a self-contained, self-referential logical system. Because the universe contains everything that exists, there is, by definition, nothing outside of it to define it.
Okay, that tracks.
Therefore, it must define itself. The universe is a language that generates its own syntax and its own physical states simultaneously. The core mechanism he introduces for this is telic recursion.
Telic recursion. Okay, that requires some translation. Break down the actual mechanism there. How does a logical loop create physical mass?
In the CTMU, telic refers to purpose or self-actualization, and recursion is, a process feeding back into itself.
Like a microphone picking up its own speaker output.
Kind of. But imagine a mathematical function that doesn't just calculate a number, but calculates the very rules of math required to produce the optimal number, and then applies those rules to itself.
Oh, wow. That's a brain bender.
It is. Langen posits that the universe constantly reconfigures its own ontological state, its basic existence, to maximize its own logical consistency. Physical matter, in this view, is just a stabilized constraint of this self-writing logic.
So the critics who analyze Langen's zero assumptions claim point out that telic recursion is doing an awful lot of heavy lifting here.
A tremendous amount.
It smuggles in the assumption that reality operates as a self-optimizing linguistic network. It's an incredibly complex assumption dressed up in the clothing of pure logic.
It really is.
Which brings us back to Arndt Michael Meyer and NKE. What is Meyer's unavoidable starting block?
NKE operates on a single, purely mechanistic tautology. Meyer calls it the Busfo process. Yes. The acronym stands for terms in German describing a binary process that is infinitely fast, infinitely fine, and omnipresent. The core assumption is that nothing absolute nix is inherently unstable and constantly divides itself.
Wait, so Campbell assumes a cosmic mind, Langen assumes a self-optimizing language, and Meyer assumes a mindless, infinitely fast meat slicer operating in the void.
That is actually a great way to put it. It's a purely mechanical engine of separation.
But how does a meat slicer of nothingness make a universe?
The mechanism of that slice is the foundation of NKE's entire universe. NKE posits that this infinitely fast division creates a crust, a virtual, infinitely thin crust or boundary within the nothingness.
Let me stop you right there. A crust of what?
Exactly the right question.
Because if you have absolute nothing and you divide it, you just have two halves of nothing. What could the boundary possibly be made of?
The boundary is made of pure difference. This is a critical conceptual leap. In NKE, physical reality is not made of stuff. It is made of relative difference.
Difference.
Right. When the Busfo process divides the void, it creates a boundary. And because the process is infinite, that boundary can never perfectly resolve. It leaves a microscopic, persistent asymmetry.
Okay, I think I'm following.
That tiny difference, the fact that side A is infinitely slightly different from side B, is what Meyer calls et was, or something.
Nix crust et was, nothing crust something. That's NKE.
Precisely. And because this process is omnipresent and infinitely fast, it doesn't just happen once. It is happening constantly, everywhere, feeding back upon itself.
So it's compounding.
Yes, creating a deeply tangled, three-dimensional, vibrating web of these microscopic differences. The literature refers to this as the Busfo Geflecht, or the Busfo lattice.
Let's talk about the transformation to essence, because this is the hardest part for any theory of everything. We are trying to cross the chasm from the foundational essence to the physical matter sitting in front of me.
From the concept to the coffee cup.
Yeah. Exactly. Mainstream physics handles transformations through phase transitions, like water freezing into ice. But the underlying essence, the H2O molecules, remains the same.
Yes, the basic building blocks don't change.
But these TOEs are attempting a complete ontological shift from non-matter to matter. How do they do it?
The mechanisms for that shift are radically distinct. Let's start with Campbell's My Big TOE again. How does consciousness become a coffee cup?
Right.
Campbell uses the mechanism of entropy reduction rendering. He views physical reality as a virtual simulation, a physical matter reality, or PMR.
I want to avoid the trap of just calling it a VR headset, though, because that kind of glosses over the actual mechanics he proposes. Campbell isn't talking about tiny screens in front of our eyes.
No, not at all.
He's talking about statistical probability collapsing into definitive states, right?
Exactly. In Campbell's model, the larger consciousness system operates as a massive data processor. When conscious intent focuses on a specific localized area of this data stream, the system lowers the entropy of that data.
It lowers the uncertainty.
Right. By lowering the entropy, it forces the probabilistic data to adopt a concrete rendered state so that conscious avatars like us can interact with it and learn from it. Matter is just highly constrained, low-entropy data rendered by conscious intent.
So the cup only exists as a solid object because the consciousness system has optimized the data stream to ensure my avatar experiences a consistent physical rule set.
Yes. Otherwise, you couldn't learn from the environment.
Without the observer, the cup is just a cloud of high-entropy potential.
Yeah.
Okay, now how does Langen get to the cup?
Langen's CTMU uses the concept of metaphysical ontology.
Another big term.
Right. Basically, matter is not a rendering for an observer. Matter is the localized physical syntax of the universe's logic.
So it's part of the language itself.
Yes. The coffee cup exists because it represents a stable, necessary grammatical construct within the self-processing language of reality. It is a dense knot of logical constraints that the universe has formulated to remain logically consistent with the rest of its environment.
Wow. So Campbell's cup is a low-entropy data rendering, and Langen's cup is a stable sentence in the language of reality.
Neither of which requires a physical fundamental particle.
Which finally brings us to NKE's Busfo lattice. Because NKE rejects the observer completely, and it rejects linguistic logic. It only has this vibrating 3D web of microscopic differences.
Just cold mechanics.
So how does a web of nothingness create a proton?
Through harmonic resonance. NKE argues that what we perceive as a particle is entirely an illusion.
Wait, an illusion?
Yeah, there are no fundamental building blocks. A proton is not a distinct entity. It is a complex, localized, perfectly stable interference pattern within the Busfo lattice.
A stable resonance cocktail. Let's map this out physically so you, the listener, can picture it.
Analogies help here.
If the universe is a massive three-dimensional ocean of water, and the Busfo process is a constant storm vibrating that water, a particle isn't a submarine moving through the ocean.
No.
A particle is a whirlpool. It is a standing wave that sustains its own shape through the specific geometry of the surrounding currents.
That analogy translates the mechanics perfectly. The proton is a specific set of frequencies in the lattice that have locked into a stable feedback loop.
So it looks solid, but it's really just motion.
Exactly. It has a boundary, it has internal structure, but the stuff it is made of is identical to the empty space around it. It is just structured difference versus unstructured difference.
Okay, if matter is just a stable vibration in a continuous web, that fundamentally changes how we have to look at the interactions between
It
matter.
changes everything.
Standard physics relies on forces: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces. And this brings us to one of the biggest philosophical headaches in scientific history, Fernwirkung, or action at a distance.
Newton famously agonized over this. The idea that a massive body like the sun could exert a physical pull on the Earth across 93 million miles of empty dead space seemed like magic to him.
Right, how does it reach across the emptiness?
Standard physics eventually introduced force fields to solve it, proposing that space isn't actually empty, but filled with fields that mediate these forces through virtual particles, like gravitons or photons.
But NKE throws out the force fields entirely.
It has to.
Because if there are no particles, there are no gravitons, there are no invisible rubber bands. So how does NKE explain the sun holding the Earth in orbit?
NKE explains gravity through the Mitzi effect, or the drag effect.
The drag effect.
Right. This requires visualizing the macroscopic geometry of the Busfo lattice. The Busfo process isn't static, it is constantly dividing and expanding. When a highly complex stable resonance like a whole planet forms in the lattice, its dense internal vibrations require structural material from the surrounding lattice to maintain stability.
It's pulling the web tight around itself.
Yes.
Imagine a tightly woven, expanding 3D net. If you introduce a massive knot into that net, the knot itself distorts the geometry of all the threads around it.
The presence of the stable resonance deforms the local expansion of the lattice. It creates a structural drag.
Oh, I see.
When a smaller resonance, like a moon, gets caught in that local deformation, it isn't being pulled by a magical field. It is simply following the structural path of least resistance within the deformed web.
It's just rolling down the hill that the Earth made in the net.
Exactly. It is a purely local interaction between the internal structure of the moon and the immediately adjacent distorted geometry of the lattice. Action at a distance is an illusion. Everything only ever interacts with what is immediately touching it.
The lattice itself provides the physical asphalt. That completely demystifies gravity. It replaces a mysterious invisible pull with pure structural geometry.
It is very elegant.
And the sources say NKE applies its exact same logic to electromagnetism.
It does. Electromagnetism in NKE is not a separate field of photons. It is simply the direct structural interaction of the spin orientations of these resonances.
Spin orientations.
Right. When two whirlpools in our ocean analogy get close to each other, the direction they are spinning will dictate whether their outer currents mesh smoothly and pull them together, or clash and push them apart.
That makes perfect sense. But the truly mind-bending part of the NKE analysis is what Meyer does to the strong and weak nuclear forces.
This is where he really burns the house down.
Right. In the standard model, the strong force is the glue. It's what holds the chaotic interior of an atomic nucleus together against the massive electromagnetic repulsion of the protons. Standard physics says this requires a constant exchange of particles called gluons.
NKE strips all of that away. In Meyer's framework, the strong and weak forces are not forces at all.
Wait, not forces at all?
No, they are completely redefined as the structural limits of the resonances themselves.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that. How can the glue holding the atom together not be a force?
Think back to our standing wave, the whirlpool. The strong nuclear force is redefined simply as the critical threshold of energy required to permanently destabilize that specific resonance pattern.
It's the breaking point of the glass.
Yes.
If you tap a wine glass, it vibrates.
Yes.
If you hit its exact resonant frequency with enough amplitude, the glass shatters. So the strong force isn't a glue holding the glass together. It is just the mathematical limit of the glass's structural integrity before the vibration rips it apart and it dissolves back into the chaotic lattice.
That is exactly it. Meyer entirely eliminates the need for gluons. There is no glue. There is only a structural breaking point.
Yeah.
And the weak nuclear force is redefined with similar elegance. In standard physics, the weak force governs radioactive decay, right? Mediated by W and Z bosons.
Right.
In NKE, the weak force is merely the natural expiration date of an impure resonance.
The expiration date, let me make sure I have this.
Go ahead.
If a resonance forms in the lattice but the harmonic frequencies are not perfectly aligned, It contains a microscopic structural flaw.
A tiny dissonance.
And over time, as the Busfo process constantly iterates and expands, that flaw amplifies.
Yes.
So the weak force is just the mathematical calculation of how many iterations that specific flawed structure can survive before the internal dissonance causes it to fall apart.
That is an absolute paradigm shift. NKE isn't just reorganizing the furniture of physics. It is, like you said, burning the house down and building a radically minimalist tent.
To claim that the fundamental forces of the universe are just the structural drag, the breaking points, and expiration dates of vibrating nothingness, I mean, it is mathematically gorgeous in its simplicity.
It really is. But a minimalist tent requires incredibly strong poles to hold it up.
Right, the rules.
If you strip away all the distinct particles and distinct fields, you have to establish absolute, unbreakable rules for how the lattice behaves. The underlying structure has to carry the weight of all physical complexity.
Which brings us to the foundational laws. In the source material, Meyer outlines around 20 lematological rules that he claims any theory of everything must adhere to.
The first four being the most critical.
Yeah, the bedrock of the entire NKE model. And I don't want to just read these like a textbook. Let's look at why a vibrating lattice of nothingness actually requires these specific rules to function.
We can deduce them from the bottom up. If we accept the premise that reality is built from a fundamentally blind, non-conscious process of division, we immediately run into a problem of physics law.
Where do the laws come from if there is no central computer to enforce them?
Exactly. An electron, or in NKE's terms, a stable resonance doesn't carry a rule book. It can't look up how it is supposed to react when it collides with another resonance, so the rules can't be external.
This logically necessitates NKE's lemma 1. Alles muss emerger. Everything must emerge.
The laws of physics cannot be pre-programmed conditions. They must be the organic, unavoidable, macroscopic result of microscopic interaction.
The laws are descriptive consequences, not prescriptive commands.
Right. But that immediately triggers the next problem. If the laws are just emergent consequences of interactions, what determines the outcome of the interaction?
Yeah, if two microscopic vibrations hit each other, why do they form a specific new pattern instead of just exploding into chaos every single time?
Because of lemma 2. Alles passiert, weil es nicht anders passieren kann. Everything happens because it cannot happen otherwise.
I mean, that sounds tautological again, but it's actually profoundly constraining when you think about it.
It is the principle of ultimate structural constraint. When two resonances interact, they do not have a probabilistic choice of outcomes.
No rolling the dice.
Exactly. The exact geometry of their internal waves, combined with the exact geometry of the surrounding lattice, dictates one and only one possible resolution. They merge, they repel, or they shatter based entirely on the path of least mechanical resistance. There is no randomness at the fundamental base.
A purely deterministic engine at the lowest level. But we haven't addressed the elephant in the room regarding the creation of the lattice itself.
Right.
If the Busfo process is an infinitely fast, perfectly even division of nothing, how do you ever get a shape?
This is the tricky part.
If I divide a blank piece of paper perfectly in half and then perfectly in half again forever, I just have perfectly identical, infinitely small squares of nothing. I never get a whirlpool.
This is where Meyer introduces lemma 3, and it is arguably the most fiercely debated concept in the AI stress tests. Lemma 3 states, Symmetry break is not wendig. Symmetry breaking is necessary.
Necessary, sure. If we want a universe, we obviously need asymmetry. We need one side to be slightly different than the other so that structure can form. But why does it break?
That's the million-dollar question.
What causes a perfect, omnipresent division of nothing to suddenly mess up and create an imperfection?
Meyer argues that the symmetry break is an inherent byproduct of infinity.
Infinity?
Yes. Because the Busfo process is infinitely fast and infinitely fine, the division can never reach a state of resolved completion. The limit of infinity itself prevents perfect symmetry. The mathematical impossibility of concluding an infinite process generates a permanent foundational flaw or asymmetry in the crust.
Okay, I'm going to push back incredibly hard on that, and I know the AI in the source documents did too.
They hammered him on this.
Yeah. Hiding the creation of the universe inside the word infinity is a mathematical sleight of hand. It's like a magician saying, I don't know how the rabbit got into the hat, but the hat is infinitely deep, so rabbit.
It's a fair critique.
Infinity is a concept. It's a direction. It isn't a mechanical cause.
The critique is entirely valid. The AI stress tests point out that this is the theory's most vulnerable logical gap. Meyer is using infinity as a generative engine. He is pushing the magical transition from pre-physics, the absolute void, into physics, the first asymmetric difference, into a realm that can never be fully resolved.
He is isolating the miracle. He's taking the massive, unexplainable mystery of the Big Bang and shrinking it down into a single, infinitely microscopic flaw.
But shrinking the miracle doesn't remove the magic.
Exactly.
Meyer actually acknowledges this vulnerability. He admits that the exact threshold where pre-physics becomes physics will likely remain epistemologically opaque. We cannot observe the origin of the first symmetry break.
It's forever hidden.
But once that initial asymmetry is granted, lemma 4 kicks in. Structure must emergieren. Structure must emerge. From that first infinite flaw, the constant feedback loop of the Busfo process organically guarantees the generation of complex, persistent structures.
So the trade-off is basically this. NKE asks you to blindly accept one infinitely small, mechanically unexplainable symmetry break.
Just one leap of faith.
Right. And in exchange, it promises to explain the entirety of the physical universe, using nothing but structural mechanics. No extra dimensions, no force-carrying particles, no cosmic consciousness.
And that exact trade-off forces us to critically evaluate whether a minimalist approach can theoretically cover all physical mysteries. I mean, if your foundation has a permanent logical wobble built into it, this unexplained infinity, how can you ever mathematically prove that the theory is correct?
You run face first into the limits of absolute proof. In the pursuit of a theory of everything, you eventually have to confront the ghost of Kurt Gödel.
Gödel's incompleteness theorem is the ultimate buzzkill for absolute mathematical certainty.
It really is.
To understand why it threatens a TOE, we have to look at the mechanism of what Gödel proved. He demonstrated that within any sufficiently complex, formal, logical system, like arithmetic, there will always be statements that are true, but which cannot be proven using the rules of the system itself.
The classic analogy is the liar's paradox applied to math. If a mathematical statement says, this specific statement cannot be proven within this system, the system is trapped.
Right.
If it proves it, the statement is false and the system is contradictory. If it can't prove it, the statement is true and the system is incomplete.
Exactly. Now, apply that mechanism to the entire universe. A theory of everything, by definition, must contain the entire universe. And you, the observer, the physicist, are inside that universe.
Right.
You are constructed the very rules you're trying to prove. Gödel dictates that you cannot step outside the system to objectively prove its foundational axioms. A self-contained universe cannot mathematically prove its own absolute origin.
You can't put the universe in a test tube if you were made of the glass. So, if mathematical proof is impossible, how does NKE justify its existence as a scientific framework?
By entirely redefining the epistemological goal, NKE introduces the concept of ta temporäre absolute Wahrheit, or temporary absolute truth.
Temporary absolute truth. It sounds like an oxymoron designed by a politician.
It sounds contradictory, sure, but it is actually a highly pragmatic description of the scientific method. Meyer argues that a TOE cannot be a perfect, closed mathematical proof from day one.
Okay.
Instead, it must function as a circumstantial proof, an Indissen Beweis. We accept the core axioms, the Busfo process, and the symmetry break as temporarily absolutely true. We then build the mathematical framework upwards. We assume it is the absolute truth until we find a physical phenomenon that fundamentally contradicts it.
It's an asymptotic approach to reality.
Yeah.
We build the model, we test it against a black hole, against quantum entanglement. If it holds, our confidence increases.
And if it breaks, we adjust the model and the error margin shrinks, approaching zero over time.
This is a massive point of divergence when we compare NKE's logical consistency directly against Chris Langan's CTMU.
Oh, absolutely.
Langan refuses to accept temporary truth. He wants an ironclad, logically impenetrable fortress. That is why CTMU relies on the supertautology. Langan wants a system that is immune to Gödel by making the system equivalent to the very logic used to observe it.
But the downside of Langan's impenetrable fortress is that you can't easily get in or out of it to do actual physics.
Right.
CTMU is a staggering work of abstract philosophy, but physicists critique it because it struggles to generate calculable predictions. It is incredibly difficult to take the concept of telic recursion and use it to calculate, say, the half-life of a radioactive isotope.
NKE sacrifices that perfect logical closure in favor of emergent, calculable pragmatism. It openly admits the foundational mystery, but then immediately employs heavy-hitting established mathematics to bridge the gap between that chaotic base and our stable reality.
And the sources highlight several specific mathematical bridges NKE utilizes.
Let's walk across those bridges, because saying it uses math isn't enough. We need to understand how the math applies to the lattice.
One of the primary tools NKE relies on is Falting's theorem. To explain this conceptually in mathematics, Diophantine equations deal with finding integer solutions, whole numbers, on complex curves.
Okay.
Falting's theorem essentially proved that for certain complex curves, there are only a finite number of rational solutions.
Map that back to the Busfo lattice for me.
Right.
We have an infinitely dividing, chaotic, continuous ocean of microscopic differences. How does Faltings help us get a discrete, stable proton out of that continuous chaos?
In NKE, the continuous vibrations of the lattice represent the infinite possibilities. But physical matter, the resonances, must be discrete and stable to persist.
Right.
NKE applies the logic of Falting's theorem to argue that within the infinite harmonic complexity of the lattice, there are only a strictly finite number of geometric configurations that can fold into perfectly stable, self-sustaining loops.
That is brilliant. The math proves that you don't get an infinite sliding scale of particle types. The geometry of a 3D web dictates that only very specific whole number vibrations can survive without instantly decaying. That's why we have a specific set of elements in the periodic table, not just an infinite blur of mass.
Exactly. NKE also leans heavily on Fourier analysis.
Sine waves.
Fourier math allows you to take any incredibly complex jagged wave and break it down into a series of simple underlying sine waves. NKE uses this conceptually to explain how macrostructures like an entire atom are just massively complex combinations of foundational lattice frequencies.
And what about the Riemann hypothesis?
It hints at the Riemann hypothesis, which deals with the distribution of prime numbers, to suggest an underlying harmonic symmetry dictating where these stable resonances can form in the first place.
So Meyer is essentially saying, I can't mathematically prove to you how the first ripple started in the pond. But if you grant me the ripple, I can use Faltings and Fourier to prove exactly why those ripples coalesce into the distinct, stable shapes we call reality.
It is an emergent pragmatism, but an emergent toe has to do more than just build a proton. It has to scale.
It has to build us.
Right. It has to bridge the microscopic world of vibrations with the macroscopic world of galaxies, and eventually the biological world of the observer.
Yeah, if I drop a glass on the floor, it shatters. The glass doesn't care about the Busfo process. How does an infinitely fast vibration of nothingness scale up to dictate the formation of the Earth or the behavior of a human being?
NKE manages this through the concept of the self-similar scale. It argues that the fundamental mechanistic cycle of the universe is recursive.
Recursive meaning it repeats.
Yes. That cycle is crust formation, leading to internal difference, building to a critical point, and resulting in a break or a localized reordering.
A fractal universe.
Yeah.
The same pattern repeating itself at every magnitude, from the microscopic to the cosmic.
And to explain the cosmic, the source documents introduce the SBT, the small bang theory.
As opposed to the Big Bang.
Right. Standard physics relies on one single Big Bang. NKE argues that planetary systems, stars, and even the origins of complex chemical life emerge from local recursive applications of the Busfo logic.
Walk me through a small bang. How does a solar system form under this model?
As complex resonances gather, their combined structural gravity creates a massive local deformation in the lattice.
And it gets pulled tight.
Exactly. This acts as a macroscopic crust, a boundary separating this dense region from the surrounding space. Inside this boundary, internal differences in heat, pressure, and spin build up extreme tension.
And then it breaks.
When that tension hits the critical limit of the local lattice structure, you get a localized break, a rapid, violent reordering of the matter into a new, stable configuration. A star ignites. A planetary disk solidifies.
It's the exact same logic as a resonance stabilizing, just scaled up by trillions.
Yes.
But scaling up to a planet is one thing. Scaling up to biology, to intelligence, requires crossing another massive ontological gap. NKE starts with a completely dead, cold, mechanistic void. How does a dead void build a consciousness capable of caring about its own existence?
This is the absolute peak of the NKE emergent ladder, described in the sources through an acronym KLAS. It stands for camel, lion, eagle, turtle in German, Kamel, Low, Adler, Schildkröte.
A menagerie of animals. I'm struggling to connect a camel to the vibration of absolute nothingness.
It is a behavioral and cognitive framework. NKE argues that once living cognitive systems humans emerge from this mechanical lattice, they are entirely subject to its structural constraints.
We don't get to step outside the laws of physics.
Right. However, our complexity allows us to perceive those constraints. KLAS represents archetypal cognitive strategies for interacting with the truth of this structural reality.
So the animals are metaphors for human survival strategies within a deterministic universe.
Yes. The camel endures the burden of reality. The lion aggressively asserts its own will against the structure. The eagle attempts to fly above it and observe the patterns objectively. And the turtle withdraws, building a protective shell against the structural friction.
That's fascinating.
The core argument here is that intelligence is an emergent survival mechanism. And the ultimate tool for that survival, according to Meyer, is Wahrheit als Fundament, truth as a foundation.
To survive in a universe driven entirely by a structural necessity, a conscious being must align its internal map of reality as closely as possible to the actual structural truth of the lattice.
Because if your beliefs contradict the mechanical reality, the structural friction will eventually destroy you.
This creates a profound philosophical divergence when we bring our comparison back to Thomas Campbell's My Big Toe. We really need to analyze where these two theories locate the concept of meaning.
It's a complete inversion.
It is.
Yeah.
Campbell places meaning at the absolute bottom. In his model, the foundational essence of reality is consciousness.
Yes.
The entire physical universe is rendered specifically to provide a sandbox for that consciousness to lower its entropy, to evolve, and to learn to make choices driven by love rather than fear. The universe exists for meaning.
Exactly. It is a teleological universe. It has a purpose baked into its origin. But the Busfo process in NKE is entirely devoid of purpose.
Right.
The foundational layer of reality is an infinitely fast, dead mechanical slice. The universe does not care if you exist. It does not render reality for your benefit.
But meaning still exists. I feel it, you feel it.
Yes, but in NKE, meaning is located exclusively at the very top. It is the ultimate emergent property. Out of the cold, dead, mechanical emergence of the lattice, complex structures form living emergence.
Meaning we make it ourselves.
Conscious beings are forced to generate their own meaning, their own purpose, as a localized strategy to navigate the cold truth of the structure.
That is a stark, almost brutal beauty. Campbell's universe is a cosmic mind that actively cares about your evolution. Langen's universe is a self-perfecting logical mind that requires your existence to balance its equations.
And Meyer's universe.
Meyer's universe is just an infinitely expanding web that forces you to open your eyes, look at the brutal geometry of reality, and carve out your own meaning using nothing but the truth as your foundation.
It forces a complete reevaluation of humanity's place in the cosmos. We are not the intended recipients of a cosmic simulation, nor are we logical necessities. We are the improbable, fragile, breathtakingly complex, harmonic resonance of a void that couldn't stop dividing itself.
This has been a staggering intellectual journey. We started by dismantling the myth of zero preconditions, acknowledging that every model must bring at least one brick to build the house.
We watched Campbell render matter through entropy reduction and Langen write matter through self-referential logic.
We fundamentally redefined the universe, replacing particles and invisible force fields with a vibrating 3D web of macroscopic nothingness. We saw gravity reduced to structural drag, and the nuclear forces reduced to breaking points and expiration dates.
We critically analyzed the hidden assumptions, particularly the reliance on infinity to force a symmetry break, and debated the pragmatism of accepting a temporary absolute truth over an impenetrable logical tautology.
And we tracked the emergence of reality from a microscopic crust to the macroscopic behaviors of conscious beings searching for truth. Which brings us to a final, deeply provocative claim raised in Meyer's 97-page thesis. He calls it the piece of cake argument.
It is the ultimate assertion of reductionism. Meyer argues that the only true insurmountable mystery in physics is that initial boundary, the precise moment pre-physics crossed the infinite threshold into the first structural asymmetry.
The moment the rabbit appeared in the infinitely deep hat.
Yes. Meyer claims that once you accept that single foundational leap, once the Busfo lattice is vibrating, the rest of existence is just a piece of cake.
Just a piece of cake.
Everything else, quantum entanglement, the formation of supermassive black holes, the emergence of DNA, the chemical firing of synapses in a human brain is fundamentally trivial. It is all just applied mechanics, cascading, deterministic downstream effects of that first vibration playing out over eternity.
It is a stunningly bold claim to look at the infinite majesty and chaos of existence and call it trivial mechanics. So here's the thought I want to leave you, the listener. to ponder as you step back out into the physical world.
A final takeaway.
If NKE is right, well, no ellipsis. So NKE is right. If we truly cracked the code and mathematically understood that exact initial vibration, would the crushing weight of a black hole, the profound depth of human grief, and the vast, terrifying beauty of the cosmos really just look like simple, inevitable baking instructions?
Or is there an inherent danger in absolute reductionism?
By stripping away the mystery, by reducing the entire universe to a mechanical piece of cake, do we lose the very perspective required to find meaning at the top of the lattice?
Are we merely the inevitable, temporary harmonic echoes of a broken symmetry, or does the sheer complexity of our emergence grant us a significance that outshines the cold mechanics of our origin?
That is the line between the math and the asphalt. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structural geometry of the reality around you, and never stop looking for the truth beneath the foundation. We will catch you on the next one.